All right, Howland Island. It's one of the many U.S. minor outlying islands, meaning it's part of the United States. It's unincorporated, unorganized. The U.S. Constitution doesn't fully apply here. There's no self governing body here. There's no human population at all. It's managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, like many of these other U.S. minor outlying islands. And like those, there's a lot of weird things that have happened here, interesting history, despite how boring and uneventful it looks from the surface. Today, we're going to do a deep dive of the history of Howland Island, talk about some of the notable things that have happened here by looking at some of the first person accounts of the island and other primary and secondary sources. All right, let's dive right in. So before we get into the history, I want to look closely at this island to see if we can see any structures on here or if there's anything abnormal. And on first glance, you can't see anything at all. There just appears to be some shrubs and then the beach. And it's honestly a pretty small island as well. It's not even a half-mile wide. But when you zoom in, you can start to see a couple weird things. Like over here on the west side of the island, you can see what seems to be an outline of some wall or building, but it doesn't appear to cast any shadow, so it's not very high. Coming a little south of the building, you can see a small structure with a shadow, maybe a lighthouse or statue of some sort. And then also kind of northeast of where these walls are, way up here, there's another structure with a shadow, and maybe something just south of that, but it's hard to tell. Outside of that, I couldn't find any notable structures on this island or honestly any like airfield ruins or anything like that. And to give some context on where this island is, let's zoom out a bit. It's in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's one of the northern Phoenix Islands near the country of Kiribati. The closest island to Howland Island is Baker Island, which I've actually done a video on in the past, with a similar history to Howland Island. But outside of those two islands, it's really kind of on its own. I mean, way down here are some of the other Phoenix Islands of Kiribati. And like many of my other videos, we could just look at the Wikipedia page, look at its history, but we're going to look at primary sources like this old book and other first-hand accounts of what it was like on the island in the 1800s to get an actual idea of what happened and to get the most accurate information. This is one of the first sources that I found. It's called The Discovery of the Pacific Islands by Andrew Sharp from 1960. There's a small paragraph in this book. It's actually seems like a really cool book for learning about all the different Pacific islands. Small blurb about Howland Island. They note that it was discovered by Captain George B. Worth, the Nantucket whaling ship Oino, about 1822, and they originally named it Worth Island, presumably after Captain Worth. Then they note that in November of 1827, Daniel Mackenzie of a different whaling vessel also discovered it and gave it its present name, which I guess is Howland. And that's really all they talk about it, although they do leave a couple sources for this information down below. So let's check out those. All right, here's our next book. It's called The Sea Hunters, the New England Whalemen During Two Centuries, 1635 to 1835. This book probably wasn't the most popular book ever, but anyways, if you go to page 374, they mention that about 35 miles above Baker Island is Howland, a barren, uninhabited island, which assumed considerable importance at the time of controversy over the establishment of air bases in the 1930s. And then they say it was claimed by the American Guano Company, having been discovered by Captain John Netcher of the New Bedford on September 9th, 1842. And they say the actual discoverer of this 3-mile long island was Daniel Mackenzie. That's the same name that we got in the last article. And here's the first-person account that we have. Captain Mackenzie went on shore and left a bottle with a paper in it, on which was written the name of Howland Island after the owner of the ship. All right, so that's where we're getting the name Howland Island from. It's after the owner of a ship of someone who discovered this island in the late 1820s. And here's the other source from that first article that we looked at. It's called American Polynesia and the Hawaiian Chain by Edwin Bryan, published in 1942. Another really great looking book describing so many of these Pacific islands, and a few of which we've already done videos on, like Vostok Island. But let's go to Howland Island to see what we can learn. And when looking through this book, a lot of these islands have very similar histories. There's sightings by whalers in the 1820s, then a long period of inactivity, then guano mining in the 1850s and throughout the 1800s, and then another period of inactivity, followed by military purposes and building airfields in the 1930s and 40s. So a lot of these islands have similar histories, and Howland Island is one of them. All right, here's a section on Howland Island. Now, this book is from 1942, so keep that in mind, but we see a lot of interesting things. You can see what appears to be an airfield down here described as the Kamakaiwi Field. There's old guano diggings all around here. There's a landing over here on the left side for boats. There's the Amelia Earhart Lighthouse, which is interesting. Then there's Itasca Town, which is right here next to this flag. So these are all things we're going to have to learn more about here. They describe Howland Island as looking like a flattened hot dog or elongated bean. Part of the north central portion has been dug over for guano. There's some artificial trenches. Otherwise, it's pretty flat. Only 6 species of plants there, lots of nesting birds, a warm and dry climate, and notably small gray Polynesian rats, extremely abundant, causing lots of distress. Oh, and down here they describe that in 1828, Captain Daniel Mackenzie also found this place. And after this point, whenever it was discovered, many ships came down here and wrecked. It was just kind of a hazard in the sea. And they confirmed that George Worth was the one who was credited for discovering it in 1822. That's the oldest official source that I could find for anyone discovering this place. And then they say in 1857, some men from the American Guano Company landed on it, built a small house, and took a lot of the guano back to be studied. Eventually, Howland was one of the islands in the United States Guano Islands Act. America basically claimed this island, saying, hey, there's guano on it, and we own it now. But before we get into the guano history, I want to go through this first-person account of Howland Island that's very well detailed. We go through many of the quotes from it to look at what life on the island was like from someone who actually stayed there. All right, in this we have a first-person account from this guy named Mr. Stenson, who was working for Mr. Howland, who the island was named after, and this was Mr. Stenson's communication to Mr. Howland about what the island was like when he visited this place in 1854. It looks like this communication was compiled by one of Mr. Howland's grandkids, so that's super cool. Let's go through some of Mr. Stenson's first-hand quotes from 1854. When he first got to the island, he thought it would be bigger than it was, but he noted, "This was much smaller than had been anticipated and gave me food for thought as to the need of a long stay to complete my investigations." So when he got there, he was pretty underwhelmed and thought this would be pretty easy. However, quickly he realized it wasn't going to be. The multitude of birds hovering over the island became more and more astounding in its numbers, and whenever a puff of wind came offshore, the noise and stench were most notable. The walk was most exhausting and filthy, and the extraordinary tameness of the birds made it necessary to scuffle through them, at times as one would if walking through the windrows of dead leaves in the autumn at home. Next to the birds and living in close and constant proximity to them, the only fauna we observed were armies of rats. The birds would, we observed, kill the rats by tearing them into pieces with their beaks and talons, or more often fly off to a point of considerable height above the reefs and drop their prey into the pounding surf, where it would seem the rat would perish. That's a similar story to what I got in this 1898 newspaper article that described that the birds do not hesitate to attack people who travel that way. The smell was so constant and overpowering that it has a gagging effect when first encountered, and even after a long exposure, seems to permeate to one's vitals. There is also barely any drinking water in this island. They describe that at a depth of 5 feet, there's a small supply of brackish water, and under severe circumstances can be used for drinking. And one of the nights, they had a battle with the rats. The smell of our food attracted the rats, and we found ourselves compelled to light our lanterns and actually defend ourselves with constant vigilance against this ever-increasing army of boarders. And by the time we were able to look around, we found ourselves surrounded by a small rampart of rats that we had slain, and to our unspeakable distress, realized that the dead were the attraction for the living, and that we were apparently doomed to a hopeless contest for as long as we should try to maintain ourselves in camp. It was apparent that the more rats we killed, the more would come to devour the remains. Then they started to use guns against the rats. The guns proved effective after 10 minutes of rapid firing. Eventually, it seems they took many of these rats and they moved them to a different part of the island and basically used that as bait for the other rats, so then the rats left them alone. Now, all my links are in the description, so if you want to read the whole story, definitely check it out there. But anyways, this is now the author of this article talking, not the original Mr. Stenson. They describe that if they are indeed Polynesian rats, implications are far-reaching. Basically, how do these Polynesian rats get on this extremely small remote island that's in the middle of nowhere? Well, their theory was that there were early Polynesian settlers who somehow ended up on Howland Island, and rats spread from there. It wouldn't be too far out of the question for someone living on these other islands to accidentally drift away and end up on Howland Island way over here. Although it's hard to tell if that would be intentional or not, given the distance. There was this other gentleman around the time, Mr. J.D. Hogg, who in the 1860s also described this theory that possibly Polynesian settlers ended up on Howland Island at one point. Mr. Hogg described that there was extensive excavations several hundred feet long on Howland Island, and that there was a footpath on the island as well, which he could not find a reasonable explanation for besides what he describes as originating from South Sea Islanders. I couldn't find much more information about this early history of Howland Island, and it seems like it's pretty unproven what exactly happened before the 1820s here. Anyways, now let's go to the Guano era of this island. And in 1865, there was a huge New York State court case between the U.S. Guano Company and the American Guano Company. Basically, the U.S. Guano Company went there in 1865, and that they found that men from the American Guano Company were already there. This went up to the New York State court. Eventually, both companies were able to mine here, and guano was just mined like crazy for the next coming years. With very hard physical labor the next like 20, 30 years, and this island was completely depleted of its resources. Also, if you don't know what guano is, it's basically a very, very good fertilizer that was found on many of these islands in the late 1800s and was basically mined and used as fertilizer and also for some other uses like gunpowder. And guano originates from seabird droppings. Now let's go back to the book American Polynesia, and they mentioned that from 1870 to 1872 was the peak of the guano digging. 7,600 tons of guano were removed from this small island. In October of 1878, almost all of the guano was gone, and digging pretty much stopped at that point. This book kind of runs through the rest of the history, which was pretty interesting, and we'll go through it real quick as well. American colonists were established on Howland in 1935. They also built an airfield at that time. And in this book, The Earhart Enigma, Tracing Amelia's Last Flight, they talk about some of this colonization that happened in 1935. Happened on three main islands, Baker and Jarvis, who we've both done videos on before, but Howland Island is that third one that they put Americans on in order to, I guess, colonize the island and establish it more as an American territory. However, this campaign wasn't super successful, and the timing of it was starting in 1935. And the Pacific. It's not a good time to be there, as we'll learn here in a second. And now we'll get to the other part of the history that a lot of people know about Howland Island. So in 1937, Amelia Earhart, Fred Noonan wanted to fly around the entire world. He made it all the way here to New Guinea, actually, and one of their next stops was to refill all the way in Howland Island, actually. And everything was prepared for this to happen. The airfield was ready. They were going to refill there. However, they never ended up making it to Howland Island. And I'm not going to go into the whole history of exactly what happened. There's so many different theories, and Veritasium has a good video describing it. There's also other theories and videos you can watch about it, so I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, basically they never made it to Howland Island, which was one of their destinations on their way back to California. And then just a few years later, 1941, ramping up for World War II, Japan led an air attack on Howland Island, killing 2 out of those 4 colonists from the American Colonization Project. And a couple days later, a submarine destroyed a few of the buildings there, and this is where they were living. This outline right here is part of the outline of the town that the American colonists were living at. And a few weeks later, another bomber plane dropped even more bombs here, basically destroying all of the buildings. It took a little bit longer for the US Navy to finally get here to Howland Island, get the other 2 colonists out of there. After this point, they pretty much stopped the colonization project. They had bigger fish to fry with World War II going on. Surprisingly, Howland Island wasn't too notable during World War II otherwise. There was an aircraft that had an engine fire near this location, landed in the water near Howland, and they ended up beaching the aircraft on Howland, and the crew were later rescued, as described in this article right here. And nowadays, Howland Island is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's pretty hard to get here. You have to be a scientist. You have to have a special permit, usually offered to scientists or other people doing like amateur radio expeditions here. So it's not super easy to get here. Also, like, it's so remote and there's not a good landing spot. There's no fresh water here. It's just very rarely visited. Now I want to go through some of the pictures that we can find on Wikipedia and talk about those. Here's what the island looks like. There's the Amelia Earhart beacon right here, and then the prominent sign that a lot of these U.S. minor outlying islands have. Here's what Howland Island could have looked like at its peak when there was a lot of guano activity. Many different buildings, houses, and ships, and lots of activity. Does not look anything like that today. Here's that original establishment from 1935. They built a couple houses on it, and this is where those 4 people lived. Honestly, seems pretty chill. I don't know what they got up to every day, but there are documentaries on YouTube of these people and what life was like. Here's another photo of what Howland Island looked like. Here's a map of what Amelia Earhart's journey was supposed to be. She actually got almost all the way around, was supposed to stop at Howland Island and then Hawaii, and then make it to California, but she never made it to Howland Island. Some old aircraft wreckage on the island, as well as that border or that outline that we saw on the map, and some of the just numerous birds on this island as well, and a close-up picture of that Amelia Earhart lighthouse, although it does seem pretty deteriorated at this point. All right, well, that's it about Howland Island for today. Hope you enjoyed this video and going into deep dives. I really enjoyed looking at some of the primary sources and getting more firsthand accounts. I think it's important, especially in this day of AI, that you take the time to look at some old primary sources. Anyways, that's it about Howland Island for today. Hope you enjoyed going through this pretty brief history about the whole place. Could probably make a whole documentary on each individual section. And thank you guys for all the really supportive comments recently. I know I haven't uploaded a video in a long time, and I'm sorry about that. I hope to be uploading some more videos soon. The videos take a lot of time and effort, and I've had a very busy work schedule recently. No, it's not an excuse to not try to make videos, but it's just been tough recently. But I want to get back into doing it again and try to make it a little more consistent in uploading so you guys can have these videos on these random remote islands. Anyways, my work schedule should be lighter in the next few months than it was in the previous few months. So appreciate you guys bearing with me, and let me know what place I should cover next. I mean, we got the whole world to explore, so we're never going to run out of options, but just let me know what I should focus on.